is to tell black people that we're victims, that discrimination and racism remain major problems in America when in fact they don't. And they want black people to vote for the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party gets 95% of the black vote, and the reason they get it is because blacks are convinced that the #1 issue facing the country right now is social justice, racist white cops, discrimination, systemic racism, microaggression, whatever new word they come up with, and it's a bunch of nonsense. The #1 problem domestically facing this country is the breakdown of the family. And President Obama said it. I didn't. A black kid, or kid, not just a black kid, a kid raised without a dad is 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crimes, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail. So you're far more likely to end up in jail without having a dad than you are because of a white racist cop.
Right. So, but you wouldn't not acknowledge that there are some systemic issues.
Give me an example. Tell me what you think the most systemic racist issue is. What is it?
Well, I would say that because black people in most cases, in many cases, were descendants of slaves, that racism as an institution, that it just, a certain amount of it just exists.
2015? Give me the most blatant racist example you can come up with right now.
I think you could probably find evidence that, in general, cops are more willing to shoot if the perpetrator is black than white.
What's your basis for saying that? Last year...
Well, look, I know a lot of people would say, look what's going on in Chicago.
I know what they would say. Yeah. I'm talking about what the facts are. 965 people were shot by cops last year and killed. 4% of them were white cops shooting unarmed blacks. In Chicago in 2011, 21 people were shot and killed by cops. In 2015, there were 7. In Chicago, which is a third black, a third white, and a third Hispanic, 70% of the homicides are black on black. About 40 per month, almost 500 per year last year in Chicago, and 75% of them are unsolved. Where is the Black Lives Matter on that? The idea that a racist white cop shooting unarmed black people is a peril to black people is BS. It's complete and total BS. And the reason for these so-called activists saying this is the assumption that racism remains a major problem in America. The media, CNN, especially MSNBC, runs down whenever a black cop shoots somebody, and it's some march on Washington. It's ridiculous. Black people, half the homicides in this country are committed by and against black people. Last year there were 14,000 homicides. Not talking about suicides, I'm talking about homicides. Half of them were black, 96% of them black on black of that 7,000. Where's the Black Lives Matter people on that?
So there's where you would say that this is purely because of social justice. This is purely because they want ultimately for people to be angry enough to just keep voting Democrat.
That's right. And where's the evidence of the lack of social justice? When a black suspect is killed by a cop, believe me, the media is on it. People are watching it, and justice will, for the most part, occur. In Baltimore, where Freddie Gray was killed, Freddie Gray died in a van. I shouldn't say was killed. Died in a van. Yeah. You have a city that's 45% black. City council is 100% Democrat. The majority of city council is black. The top cop at the time was the mayor is black, the AG is black, and yet here we are talking about racism. I mean, it's absurd. Yeah. It's absurd.
So it's funny, I find myself caught in between this a little bit as a liberal, where I want to always try to defend the other. So in this case, the other being black people, I'm always sympathetic to that. And that, at the same time, I hear you laying out a pretty solid case.
Well, these are just the facts. I'll tell you something else, too. There was just a study, University of Washington. And it turns out cops were more reluctant, more hesitant to pull the trigger against a black suspect than a white suspect, probably because of the fear of being accused of racially profiling and the fear that the civil rights establishment was going to come down on them. So if anything, whites are more likely to be shot by a cop under certain circumstances than a black person. And in the last 30 or 40 years, the percentage of suspects killed by cops who are black has declined 75%. However, the percentage of whites killed by cops has flatlined.
Yeah.
And so, if anything, people are more concerned about shooting black people for fear that they're going to be called racist. And almost every one of these incidents, whether it's Eric Gardner in New York, who died because he was selling Lucy's and resisted arrest, whether it's Tamir Rice in Cleveland, who was twirling around the gun, whether it's Michael Brown in Ferguson, who had just committed a strong-arm robbery, almost every one of these incidents involved somebody resisting arrest. Why don't you just do what the police tell you? My dad said, when I get pulled over, have my hand at 10 o'clock, have my hand at 2 o'clock, say yes, sir, say no, sir, make sure my paperwork is in order, and if I feel the cop is mistreating me, get a badge number and deal with it later on. If Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton and Obama and the whole group of them told black people to do that, we'd have a lot fewer of these things to deal with in the first place. But you haven't laid out yours. I asked you to name the most important example of racism, and you gave white cops going after black people. And I told you, gave you the facts for that, so that's nonsense. So you must have something else. What else is it? If you think racism remains a problem in America, give it to me.
Well, I think it remains a problem.
Give it to me.
It may not be systemic in that it's not like you're not being hired because you're black. There's no systemic reason, legal reason that exists, that kind of thing. But I think that racism as a general theory exists.
I need some specifics. You gave me the white cop thing. What else? Give me another example where you think is a problem.
Well, as a black conservative, tell me how do you get people to come around?
You're the one who made the assertion that you think racism remains a major problem in America. I asked you to give me an example. You gave me white cops going after blacks. As far as I'm concerned, you didn't hold it up very well. What's the other argument you have? What's the other thing?
Well, I don't know that it's systemic in the sort of macro sense.
I'm not mad. I just want to know what it is you're talking about.
That's exactly what believe me, that's 100% what I wanted to have you.
Blacks are not getting into school. BS. We have affirmative action. So a black person with an SAT and a GPA of X will get into a school faster and easier than a white person with an SAT or a GPA of X. And if going to school is a route to the middle class, you can make an argument that blacks have an easier route to the middle class. If you're talking about about poverty, the poorer you are, the more accessible loans and grants are for you. The problem, the biggest burden that black people have, in my opinion, again, is the percentage of blacks, 75% of them, that are raised without fathers. And that has every other social negative consequence connected to it. Crime, not being able to compete economically in the country, being more likely to be arrested, that's the number one problem facing the black community. And when I hear people tell me about systemic racism or unconscious racism, I always say, give me an example, and almost nobody can do it.
So the family stuff. So I'll follow your logic there on the family stuff. What can actually be done about that then? I mean, because that's a big
reverse the welfare state. In 1890, 1900, you look at census reports. A black kid, believe it or not, was slightly more likely to be born to a nuclear intact family than a white kid. Even during slavery, a black kid was more likely to be born under a roof with his biological mother and biological father than today. What's happened is we launched this so-called war on poverty in the 60s, where literally Lyndon Johnson sent people knocking on doors. I lived in the 60s, and people knocked on doors apprising women of their availability to welfare, provided there was no man in the house. And we went from 25% of blacks being born outside of wedlock in 65 to 75% right now. And you look at how much money that we spent on welfare, and the lines are parallel. It was a neutron bomb dropped on this country, not just on the black community, but on people in general. At one time, only about 5% of whites were born outside of wedlock. Now 25% of whites are born outside of wedlock. I was in college in 1970, and there was a report called the Moynihan Report, The Negro Family, A Case for National Action. It was written by a liberal, by a man who became a Democratic senator from New York. And at the time, 25% of black kids were born outside of wedlock. He said, my God, this number is horrific. If we don't do something about it, it could get even higher. Well, fast forward, 25% of white kids are now born outside of wedlock. It is the number one problem in this country, and what we've done, in my opinion, is we've economically incentivized women to marry the government, and we've allowed men to abandon their financial and moral responsibility. And now we have this.
So do you
and the left has done this.
Right. Okay. So do you think then that as a black conservative, that the biggest issue is it's impossible to have this conversation? Right. Like the stuff we're talking about right now is rarely really discussed in the media. You know, you've written some books about it, and people talk about it every now and again, but we rarely have this discussion because, and this is where I will agree with you, that the left has made language such a problem, and everyone's so trigger-warned and safe space, that we're afraid that if you have this conversation, that somehow I'm going to come off racist.
That's not why we don't have the conversation. We don't have the conversation because the left would then have to look in the mirror and go, Jesus H. Christ, look at what I've done. And they don't want to do this. I've had a radio show for almost 25 years. I've invited Jesse Jackson on 50 times, 60 times. I've invited Al Sharpton on that number. Maxine Warder, another loudmouth black woman around here who's running around talking about racism. She won't come on my show either. They don't want to deal with these issues. Why? Let's have a conversation. If I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong. Tell me how I'm wrong. Give me your data. Give me your facts. Tell me what you got.
Yeah.
And I could quote the Brookings Institution, which is a liberal think tank, and the Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative think tank, and they'll both tell you that there's a relationship between crime and bad schools and going to prison and not having a dad. So this is not just a liberal kind of thing or a conservative kind of thing. It's a real world kind of thing, and they don't want to have that conversation. I've never heard a reporter ask Obama about the connection between the rise of the single-parent household and the rise of welfare spending. I've never heard anybody ask him that question, not one time.
Yeah.
And so, as far as I'm concerned, there's this desire not to have this conversation for fear that it then will cause you to rethink your assumptions. A psychologist would call that cognitive dissonance. This anxiety that you feel when you have had your assumptions challenged and you don't want to do it. It's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
The only thing that connects black people to the Democratic Party, in my opinion, is this notion of social justice and this notion that racism remains a major problem in America. Look down the list of things that black people like and support. Blacks are more pro-life than whites are. Blacks were more anti-gay marriage than whites were. That's one of the reasons this proposition passed here in California, is because of the way blacks and browns voted. Again, I didn't vote that way, but it's the way a lot of blacks and browns did. Blacks want to be wealthy. One of the reasons Donald Trump is getting about 25% of blacks, which is 5 times, by the way, the percentage that Mitt Romney got, is because of Donald Trump's swagger and his being proud that he's made money. The Democratic Party is completely beholden to the teachers union and vice versa. The union is adamantly opposed to vouchers, where the money follows the kid rather than the other way around. Inner city black women and fathers and inner city black brown women and brown fathers want vouchers. They realize the schools suck. I went to Crenshaw High School in South Central. Right now, 3%, that's not a typo, 3% of kids can do math at grade level. I'm going to send my kid to that school because I don't have enough money to send my kid to a better school. It's an assault. Privatizing Social Security, vouchers, abortion, same-sex marriage, all of these issues, blacks are really not in lockstep with the Democratic Party. But the Democratic Party has successfully convinced blacks that racism, this white cop, this is widespread, the man's out to get you, and vote for us and we'll deal with it.
So how much of this is a messaging problem? If I grant you all of that, right? How much of this is just a messaging problem by the Republicans? Because it seems to me, and I've said this several times, that someone like Tim Scott, who is a black Republican senator from the South, he should be a hero, not only of the black community, but he should really be a hero of the left, right? Because this is a successful black
He should be an American hero.
He really should be. I mean, he should certainly at the very least, be bigger in the national debate. Why isn't he a bigger surrogate for whoever he's going to support? I assume it will be a Republican. Why is this guy lost in the scheme of things?
Well, it's the same reason that blacks vote 95% for the Democratic Party. He's considered to be an Uncle Tom. He's a Republican. He's a black Republican. He's some sort of unicorn. I don't know what he is. That's how they feel.
So then, what do you do? What do you do as a Republican to break this narrative? Now, I got it. You tell the truth. I got it. You tell the truth. But obviously, there has to be something bigger than messaging here, because you're telling me the numbers, 90-95% vote Democrat.
It's an uphill fight. I mean, to me, there is a access of indoctrination. You have the media, you have academia, and you have Hollywood, all of which tell black people that they're victims. Most professors are to the left. The media certainly is all to the left, and Hollywood's to the left. And so you get up and you're indoctrinated all the time with things like social justice, inequality, the man's out to get you, we need a higher minimum wage. You name the left-wing policy, and you pick it up through osmosis. That's why when we first started the conversation, I said I hope to move you towards the center, and you said I hope to move you towards the center. And I said it's not going to happen because there's nothing you can tell me I haven't heard, but I probably can say some things your audience hasn't heard, because LA Times, New York Times, CNN, ABC, NBC, CBS, New York Times, you name it, these are all to the left. Whatever left-wing position, you're going to hear it. You're going to hear why, how, and where. But the other position you won't hear unless you watch Fox News or listen to talk radio, and a lot of people won't do it if you make them, if you pay them.
Right.
Shows you how the Democratic Party has evolved to the left and abandoned principles. My mom was a Democrat. My mom was a Republican. My dad was a Republican all his life. And my mom stopped voting for the Democratic Party. And she said, as many people have said, I didn't leave the Democratic Party, they left me. She didn't like welfare. She didn't like the idea of rewarding people just because you had a kid and then giving you more money when you had an additional kid. She didn't like any of all of that. So it's not messaging. It's the fact that the country in general has gone to the left, and the Democrats to a greater degree than Republicans have gone to the left. The country has changed, in part, in my opinion, because of immigration, including illegal immigration. People who are coming to the country illegally from third world countries like Mexico, they don't know what I'm talking about when I talk about limited government. They believe health care is a right. They're taught that in Mexico. They're taught that other places. And they come here in America, and they pull that lever for the Democratic Party, which is why, in my opinion, the left wants borders to be porous, because it changes the country.
Right.
Changes the electorate.
It changes the demographics and all that.
The Democratic Party has not won the white vote since 1964. The more white people there are in the country, the worse Democrats do. The more left-wing, the more people of color there are in the country, the best the left does. And so what incentive is there for them to police the borders? What incentive is there for them to shut down sanctuary cities, to stop catch and release? There isn't. In my opinion, there's been a very subtle and very diabolical changing of the mentality of this country by left-wing people, so that a state like California could never vote for Ronald Reagan as they did in the past, could never vote for Richard Nixon as they did in the past. You have New York and California, just write them off. And there's 10 or 12 states now that we fight over. Everything else is now written off. It's ridiculous.